First of all, thank you for coming on this chilly day, right? Glad you're here. What we will try to do is, we're going to look at the FMLA, we're going to look at some other laws initially, just kind of as an intro, some recent law changes. I always try to do that, so that my son is calling, he'll have to wait, so that we can, manage our business in a way proactively before we have a problem. That's the whole point of this. I'll try very hard to answer any questions that were posed on the invitation. If I do not, and there's something that really got your interest, please let me know, and I'll be glad to discuss that with you. If you are not on the mailing list, and perhaps you've heard of this seminar through word of mouth, and you would like to be on the mailing list, please let us know. We try very hard to, get feedback, solicit feedback. So we have these forms. I'm just going to pass them around. If you'll just take one and pass them on. And if you want to be added to the mailing list and you're not, please just put a note on here. It should be more than one. There we go. And you have Greg. Got it. There you go. This can also be a really good way to communicate back. If I say something that's not clear, you want more information, just put it on your feedback form. Just be sure you put your name, because if I'm responding, I need to know who I need to get back to, and sometimes we get busy and forget that part. Okay, in the room, in the back of the room, is Steven Spielberg. Oh no, it's Kim. It's Kyle Gibson.
He's my uncle.
He's going to be recording this today. We have had some requests that it be posted later for viewing. So we've never done this before, so it's a trial. We're not even sure it's going to work. So we're just going to see. So just FYI, that's what Kyle's going to be trying. And then also Jared Bostrom, which many of you guys know as well. And Jared and I work together here on these types of topics, often that deal with compliance and risk management. The other thing I should pass around, and y'all just kind of keep this going. Sometimes we get busy and it needs to make it off of the room. This is your sheet if you would like a certificate that you were attended. It's also, if you are a PHR and SPHR, you can get credit. And so we'll be sure to get your certificate before you leave. But a lot of people just like to get the certificate. It's a really nice looking document that our office manager generates. So just let us know if you would like to get that certificate. Okay, by way of housekeeping, good time to check your phones, see if they're on silent. We understand that you're working, so if you need to make a phone call or there's a lobby, please feel free to step out of the room if you need to do that. I understand. We'll probably break around 10 o'clock, somewhere right around there, for about 15 minutes. Restroom break, coffee break, what have you. That'll be what I'll shoot for. The restrooms, you go down the steps and toward the front of the building, and when you're looking at the glass doors at the front, take a left, and the restrooms are right there on the hallway, the men's and the women's. There are some handouts in the back of the room, just kind of a smattering of different topics. There's a lot more that is not on that table. We don't have to have it big enough for that. But if you see something that you would like, just go ahead and take one of those, if that's useful to you. Okay, let's look at some law changes, some things that have happened recently. This is the time of year where all of the maximum contributions, etc., for your retirement plans, HSA limits, etc., gets issued. The FSA maximum, this just came out actually this week. The flexible spending account for the contribution limit on the medical went up by $50. It's now $2,550 for plans starting January 1 of 15. And then dependent care remains the same for 15, with an annual limit of $5,000 or $2,500 married filing single. You may have been aware of the two changes. We sent out a notice about this also Tuesday of this week, regarding the Affordable Care Act. There are two notices. One describes an approach for applying the look-back measurement to determine full-time status. When you have an employee that transfers from a large employer in a position to which one measurement of period applies and then goes to a position where a different measurement period applies, that can be defined in this notice, okay, and how that's handled. The other notice expands the application of the change rules. Where you have an employee that's under your pre-tax plan, that's a once-a-year election, so they're under your pre-tax plan, and they may want to revoke their election under the employer-sponsored plan in order to exit and go to the exchange marketplace. That's now a qualifying event and allowable. It was not until now. But you do need to contact your administrator for your 125 plan if you want to allow that. Okay? So right now, if you have an employee that wants to exit your group plan, health plan, and go to the marketplaces, it is a QE, but only if it's in your plan document. So please take note of that. There's also a second qualification or scenario there when they want to purchase that coverage so that it would not be a duplication of the coverage. So just talk to your administrator about that and make those changes if you would like. Let's see.
Finding that qualifying event, is that a mandatory thing, or is it just the federal government, if you can, it's an option you can do?
It's now an option. It's now an option. It is not mandatory, which is kind of interesting. That's just the way that it is. You have to change your document. Okay. The Department of Labor, IRS, and HHS, Health and Human Services, have issued a FAQ, people frequently asked questions, regarding the compliance concerns that arise when employers establish funding arrangements designed to encourage employees to purchase individual health insurance policies. In other words, the government is stepping up and saying, we want to be sure the employer is not encouraging people, or discouraging people not to have that freedom, okay? And this was issued by EBIA, which you guys probably recognize as one of the leading consultants, if you will, in the industry. Some had suggested that that employers could reduce their costs by providing incentives for high claims employees to purchase exchange coverage instead of enrolling in the employer's plan. Okay, so think about that. So this FAQ seems to close the door on that strategy. So just be careful with that. So just reading between the lines, there's what is the motive behind this. And then, as we know, with pre-existing going away and the HIPAA portability, HIPAA portability allowed special qualifying events for the employee to exit or enter the group plan. Life events, marriage, birth of a child, adoption, that kind of thing. So now with pre-existing, when an employee goes from employer to another employer, you needed to substantiate your prior coverage, right? Well, that's no longer necessary because pre-existing is going away, those limitations. So you'll find that some of your TPAs that you work with, like Ceridian, that's now WageWorks, and those kind of TPAs are now saying, hey, we're not going to issue certificate of critical coverage anymore. There's no purpose for it. Pre-existing is going away. Now, the one thing that will remain with HIPAA will be your special enrollment, during the year. That's another facet of that portability. It has nothing to do with pre-existing. It's just whether or not you can come into the plan. So that will remain, a phenomena or intact with HIPAA portability. Okay, different topic, voting. What is the Georgia law on allowing employees time off to vote? Does anybody know?
I thought it was an option.
Well, you should allow them 2 hours off for voting, okay? But we do not mandate that they be paid during that time period. It's up to 2 hours, okay? In Georgia. There are some states where, yes, you allow them time off and you pay them. So just a little differentiated there. All right, OSHA injury reporting rules. Who in here is concerned with OSHA? Is that a big one? Okay, but it depends on the industry. You still need to comply, but it's a bigger issue for certain industries than others. The current regulations require employers to report work-related fatalities and inpatient hospitalizations of 3 or more employees within how many hours? 8 hours of the event, okay? Pop quiz there. The new rule retains the requirement to report fatalities to OSHA within 8 hours, but amends the regulation to require employers to report all work-related inpatient hospitalizations, as well as amputations and loss of an eye within 24 hours. Okay, so that's a change there. And it goes into effect January 1st of 15. And even if you are partially exempt, this does still, remain intact. It doesn't affect you. So, just FYI. Then this was an interesting one because it was an overlap of FMLA and OSHA. The Federal OSHA Review Commission recently issued an important ruling for employers who have to deal with conflicting reporting and confidentiality requirements under OSHA and FMLA. An employee in the Postal Service Distribution Center in Seattle, Washington submitted an application for leave under FMLA after she learned she was allergic to the dust generated at the facility where she worked sorting mail. The Postal Service did not record the illness as work-related on the OSHA 300 log or 301 form. The employee complained with OSHA, and after an investigation, OSHA issued a citation. The Postal Service contested the citation, and then after a hearing, the judge upheld the citation. It was very minimal, it was $500. And the Postal Service appealed, the commission agreed with the employer on all points, reversed it, so it kind of went back and forth, back and forth. But the point is, you're trying to maintain the employee's confidentiality, so how much can go on that OSHA log? Because it's public, right? It's posted every year, right? This is an important and welcome decision for employers and HR managers who routinely have to navigate the minefield of conflicting and confusing regulations. The upshot is that if an employer receives information in connection with an application for leave under FMLA, indicating that the employee's condition may be work-related, the employer does not have to record the injury on the OSHA log report. Okay, so I thought that was just kind of interesting. For those of you who already work with us, we do have a tool for you called Think HR. Is that ringing a bell with anybody? I hope it is. It's a really, really good tool. And a lot of the material in the back of the room comes from that. I just wanted to make you aware that it's like I think it's an 8 or 9 hour per day period where you get free call-in service to a VHR, SVHR, who doesn't want to bounce something off of someone else periodically. And they're very good about returning your call, I will tell you that. We've had really good results with that, so I just want to remind you that that is something that if you have situations where you don't want to sound anymore, but you really don't want to spend the $300 to talk to the attorney, this is another resource for you. Okay, so a lot of that's in the back of the room, and we'll move on. Okay, in your books, now y'all bear with me here. We transitioned some of this material from an old format to a new format. So just bear with me if I have to ask you to wait just 1 second. But what you have is you have a book in front of you with, oh my goodness, what do we have? 5 or 6 tabs in here? A lot of information. We all know that FMLA is pretty complex. I mean, that's why you guys are here, right? Because there's a lot to it. So what I'll try to do is to give you some basics, and then we'll get into what I call the nitty-gritty a little bit later. You have highlighters in front of you. I encourage you to use those highlighters because there's going to be some things in here, again, coming back to the basics that you're going to need and you're going to want to remember what they are. Okay, so go to your first tab under General, and we're going to go to page 1. At the very top it says Covered Employers. And as simple as this may seem, it can be confusing. A covered employer, this is the first paragraph, a covered employer under the FMLA is a person engaged in commerce or in any industry or activity affecting of commerce that employs 50 or more employees for each working day during each of 20 or more work weeks in the what? Current or preceding year. Okay, so we ought to remember that because we tend to think just about this year, right? So it could be this year or last year, okay? About halfway down the page, you have a title, Counting Employees for Determining Coverage, and it basically says in that first paragraph that if you're trying to define an employee, that last line there of the first paragraph, the definition of employee is basically the FLSA. Now, what size of employer does the FLSA apply to? Just about every one of them, even if you've got 2 or more. So the definition of employee is the same as what's under FLSA. That second paragraph under that heading, where the word employee is bolded, as defined in FLSA, includes to suffer or permit to work. So if you and the employer have someone working for you that you are suffering or permitting to work, they should be counted. That's basically what it boils down to. You go on to the next page, page 2, we talk a little bit about integrated employers halfway down, but before we get that, let's just kind of revisit what we just said about FMLA and make a comparison with COBRA, okay? So FMLA says that you're a covered employee if you have 50 employees, compared to COBRA, which is how many? 20 employees on 50% of the work days in which year? Prior year, okay? So if we're looking at just FMLA, all right, let's think about the definition. 20 or more work weeks, current or preceding calendar year. So we have an employer in 2001, they had 15 employees. Are they FMLA? No, they're far from it, right? What about 2008? They have 20. Still not FMLA, right? 2009, okay, January and February, they have 15. But March through December, they have 70. So are they, in that year, do they become an FMLA employer?
Yes.
It's current or previous, so yes. Okay. 2010, they have 70 employees the first 2 months, but only 15 most of the year. Are they FMLA? Yes, because of why?
Because they had current year, preceding year.
Prior year. Prior year. Yes, sir.
Is the stipulation of 50 more employees within a 75-mile radius, is the radius thing now gone?
Nope, we'll get to that in a second. It's still there. It is still there. All right, so that's FMLA. So let's look at COBRA. So 20 employees on more than 50% of the typical business day in the previous year. All right, so 2001 we had 15. Are we COBRA? No. Startup company, 15 employees? No. 2008 we have 19. Are we COBRA? No. The next year, most of the year we have 70 employees. Are we COBRA?
No.
No, why not?
Not previous year.
Previous year, right? 2010, the first 2 months we have 70. 2 months out of the year we have 15. Are we COBRA?
Yes. Prior year.
It's not just the moment you pass less than 20 employees, right? You've got to think about the prior year.
So does it go from January of the prior year or any part of the prior year regardless of where you are in the current year?
Yeah, it's prior business year. Prior business year. Yeah, business days in the previous calendar year, technically. Okay. So here's the point. A 15-person group could be subject to FMLA and COBRA. Okay. We don't think about it that way, but that by definition is what it is. So just be aware of those differences there. And it really comes into play if you have a growing company or a company that's shrinking, and that was what we were trying to illustrate here. Okay. Page 2, halfway down, integrated employers. We get this question a lot. It's not so much, Greg, the 75-mile radius is, okay, what if we own multiple companies? And that question does come up. And what they're saying here is, separate entities are considered to be parts of a single employer for purposes of FMLA if they meet the integrated employer test. And what they're going to look at is those 4 bullet points right there. Common management, interrelationship between operation, centralized control of labor, and degree of common ownership. We've seen a lot of these come into play as well under healthcare reform as to where, are they a small employer or a large employer? You got someone who owns multiple companies. Very, very much the same. Joint employers, where 2 or more businesses exercise some control over the work or working conditions of the employee. The business may be joint employers. Okay. If you go on to the next page, page 3, look at PEOs. Is anybody in here in a PEO situation? No? Okay. What the regulation said previously, if you were a 15-employee entity, company, If you were part of a PEO, guess what? You had to offer FMLA because you were part of a PEO, right? That changed, and so now it really does come back to who's the primary employer, who's the secondary employer. So let's look at this paragraph here. Go down to the third line. It's about halfway across. The determination of whether PEO is a joint employer also turns on the economic realities of the situation. Look at the facts and circumstances, okay? It really depends on who has the ability to hire and fire the employee. Go down 2 or 3 more lines about halfway across. On the other hand, if in a particular situation, a PEO has the right to hire, fire, assign, or direct and control the employees, or benefits from the work the employees perform, such rights might lead to the determination that PEO would be a joint employer with a client employer. So you have to look at each situation and who's really got that control. And then they go on to talk about primary and secondary employers. Generally, where there's a joint employment relationship, the employers are designated as either primary or secondary. The primary employer has the greatest level of control over the employee and is responsible for providing notice, leave, health benefits, and job restoration. And then they give you those 4 bullet points about who's primary, hiring and firing, etc. And it talks about placement agencies. So does anybody in here ever work with a placement agency or temporary workers? Are you FMLA? Who has to execute that FMLA? That's what we're getting at. For employees of temporary placement agencies, for example, the placement agency most commonly would be the primary employer. Where a PEO is a joint employer, the client employer most commonly would be the primary employer. So you need to know what that relationship is with those employees as to who has to execute. Are you responsible for giving that individual their FMLA paperwork? And who keeps track of that? And so just kind of a heads up if this falls to you. Okay. Page 4. Counting employees of joint employers basically says they have to be counted by both. So if you're trying to determine if you're FMLA and you have individuals in this scenario, both you have to count them and the PEO, okay? The joint employer, I should say. Excuse me, joint employer. So be aware of that. Go on to page 5. And the way that this new material is organized is we'll go through a segment and then it gives you some review points, which I think is good. We all like those simple statements, right, before we get cross-eyed. So what I'll try to do is as we go through these, I will just tell you 2 or 3 that kind of are good points to remember. It's all good, but we certainly can't go through everything. So on page 5, look at number 6. Full and part-time employees, as well as employees on paid or unpaid leave or disciplinary suspension, must be counted as employed if they're expected to return. So sometimes that's very confusing. Who do I count? You know, who is my FMLA employee? Go down to number 10, existence of common management and relationship, existing degree of ownership and financial control. Those are the things you look at is to find out where 2 or more entities are in fact one employer. Then go on to number 14. The primary employer must provide notice, leave, health benefits, and job restoration. And then finally, number 18, look at this one. Supervisors as well as companies can be held what? Liable for FMLA violations. We'll talk a little bit later about how important it is to train and understand that. All right, so that's the employer side. Let's go to page 6. We're going to talk about employees. The FMLA defines an eligible employee as an employee of a covered employer who meets all the following criteria. Has been employed at least 12 months. How many hours? 1250 during a 12-month period immediately preceding, and is employed at a work site of 50 or more within 75 miles. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. All right, so the next subhead, eligibility, 12-month. Look at that first sentence. To be eligible for leave, an employee must work for the covered employer for at least 12 months. The 12 months of service need not be continuously consecutive. So be aware of that once they've accumulated that.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
The 12 months does not have to be consecutive, but the 1250 have to be consecutive
Have to be consecutive?
within the past year.
No, because let's go back and look. It does say the second bullet during the 12-month period.
Okay.
Does it say? Yeah. Once they've accumulated that point.
Very good.
Okay. Well, thing I wanted to point out is, you'll see right, that second paragraph that starts, employment periods preceding a break in service of more than 7 years must be counted in determining whether the employee has been employed for at least the 12 months. So there's your time frame look back. There was none before some of the recent revisions. But that very first bullet, the employee's break in service is occasioned by the fulfillment of the employee's National Guard or Reserve military service obligation. The time served performing military service must also be counted in determining whether the employee has been employed. So in other words, this is a protection of those in the military. It is not taking away their time of accumulating toward their rights. If they're in the military, it's not counted against them. So be aware of that. Okay, at the bottom of the page, it does give us a little bit more explanation of those 1,250 hours include, or maybe the second sentence there, the 1,250 hours include only those hours actually worked, including overtime hours. It does not count paid leave, unpaid leave, or sick time. Okay? So let's move on. Page 7 gives you more specifics there at the top. And then the second full paragraph, I guess it is, the determination of whether an employee has worked. The determination of whether an employee has worked the employer for at least 1,250 hours in the past 12 months and has been employed by the employer for a total of at least 12 months must be made the date the leave is to start. So that's when your look back is. And we'll talk about that in just a moment because this tends to be a confusing point as well. All right, at the bottom we start talking about work site. What if I have somebody who lives off site? Do they get FMLA if they're more than 75 miles? So let's talk about work site. Okay, go to page 8. The third, there's a sentence at the top and then your second paragraph starts for employees with no. So who would be an example of somebody with no fixed work site? Well, someone who doesn't really go into an office, right? Do we have salespeople that just work out of their home? That's not really a fixed work site, is it? I mean, they're just kind of out there. They're not coming into a cubicle or an office, okay? For employees with no fixed work sites, such as construction workers or transportation workers, the work site is the site to where they're assigned as their home base, from which their work is assigned or to which they report. Okay, so let's see if this helps a little bit. So let's talk about multiple work sites and whether they're 50 employees within 75 miles. So let's say at our first site we have 17 employees, and then the second work site we have 35 employees, and these two sites are 60 miles away. So how many employees do we have? 35 and 17? 52? I guess 52. So would those be FMLA eligible? Yeah, because you've got the 50 within the 75. Look at this, 100 miles from the site with 35, we have 7. So your total there would be, what, 42? The math is good. Are these people FMLA eligible? No, because you don't meet that radius. Okay,
No, even if they were 35 away from, it still wouldn't be, yeah, because it would include the 35 employees, but it wouldn't include the other 17, correct?
You've got,
For the company on the
oh, I
right.
see what you're saying, yeah, they were less than that. And you had the, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah, because these would fall off, right? Yeah, I see what you're saying, okay? So this becomes a little bit more complicated too, again, when you have people that are off site, and I'll show you that in just 1 second. Go to that next paragraph where it says example. If a construction company headquartered in New Jersey opened a construction site in Ohio and set up a mobile trailer on the construction site as the company's on-site office, the construction site in Ohio would be the work site for the employees hired locally. If that construction company also sent personnel from New Jersey to the job site in Ohio, those workers sent to New Jersey continue to have their headquarters in New Jersey. So, I know, it's getting like all a bouncing ball here. So, let's say in New Jersey, we have 52 employees, okay? And they're going to send 7 employees to Ohio. We have 7 here. So what they're saying is, these 7 still count toward the New Jersey 52. And so they would continue, their reporting relationship is back to New Jersey. So because of that, in this particular scenario, they would get their FMLA under the New Jersey location. Now, what would happen if we hired 45 people here, okay? And even though there are more than 50 here, this 7 is counted over here, not here. So there's only 45 for purposes of determining FMLA eligibility at this location. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, over time, if we had, maybe we grow this location and it's a huge project and they hire another 100, then, obviously those would be eligible for FMLA. Does that make sense? So it gets a little tricky, but if you read through this, they do give some pretty good examples that might help. The other thing too that I wanted to point out is if you go back to just your worksite locations, and let's say that you have a couple of people traveling together. So I'm going to do it this way just for purposes of illustration. Because I think it's important that we understand that whether or not your FMLA can get very challenging. Let's say at your first location, you have 35 employees. Okay. And let's put this 50 miles. And at this location, you're going to have 30 employees. Okay. So at this location, would they be FMLA qualified?
No.
You got 50. Okay. And you got 35 and 30, so 65 employees.
Oh,
Okay, right, I know, you gotta think about this. So yes, they are, and this one will be qualified as well, right, because of your mileage and your head count. Let's say you have another location and you only have 12 employees, and let's say that distance is 50 miles. Do these people get FMLA? No. Now, let's say we have one employee from this location traveling with one employee from this location. Okay, on business, they're traveling together. I have 2 employees, okay? Oh no, they're on the interstate. They get hit. They are taken to the hospital. It's really bad. One of them has to get air flighted. And now, the company's upset, it's a terrible accident. Weeks later, they start getting the bills. And so you're in the middle of trying to help them through all that. The question becomes, this person got what for their insurance? FMLA, right? So you have one person that has FMLA. This guy was not, now that they're off of the clock, if you will, and they're rehabbing and they're not actively at work, if they don't get FMLA, then how do we keep them covered? COBRA. Would it be work comp? Well, yeah. But what work comp is only going to pay that claim, right? So let's say that they're rehabbing for 6 weeks. Week 7, right? They have a second accident. They're beginning to feel like they have a bullseye on their back. Second accident. It's not work related. They were going to go see their mother. Okay? They didn't have FMLA. They were covered under COBRA, right? So you've got to think about, how am I going to keep these people insured? All right? We'll get into this. My point in bringing this up is you could have several things going on at once. And not everybody gets FMLA. So the other way to get them insured and get their claims paid would be work comp or COBRA, which can run together, right? Because does work comp keep your group medical insurance intact?
no.
No, it pays for that one work comp incident. Okay? So just be aware of that. We'll come back to that. I just wanted to kind of tee that up in your mind. Okay. There is some information at the bottom of that same page about air flight crew. We don't have anybody in the air industry, do we? I don't think so. Let's go on to page 12. Okay. What about notice of eligibility? And we'll talk about notifications a little bit later.
How many pages
They're not numbered?
No, or mine.
I'm sorry, I thought the bottom it said a number. Oh, did it cut off? It was on the sample book, I apologize for that. All right, go to the one, it's from page 8 or 9 to page 12. At the top it says notice of eligibility. Okay, thank you for making me aware of that. Okay, notice of eligibility. Go down to the fourth paragraph that says note in that bold print. Employee eligibility is determined and notice must be provided at the commencement of the first instance of leave for each FMLA qualifying reason in the applicable 12-month period. All FMLA absences for the same qualifying reason are considered a single leave, and employee eligibility as to that reason for leave does not change the 12-month period. Okay? So just be aware of that. Each incident stands alone. You've got some review there at the bottom. A lot of that's pretty standard. I'm not going to belabor that. If you go, let's see, one page, actually 2 pages, it should throw at the top, structuring FMLA leave. Now I'm counting. I'm not leaving anybody behind here. Structuring FMLA leave. Okay. At the very top, you've got the fundamentals of why can someone take the leave. Okay, those bullet points, so highlight these. The birth of employee son or daughter to care for a newborn child. The placement of the employee or of a son or daughter for adoption or foster care to care for that child. To care for the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parent with a serious health condition. Does it say anything about your in-laws? No. Now let me ask you a question. You've got women working at your workplace, and the mother-in-law gets very sick. Do you think she might need to step aside, be out of work to take care of the mother-in-law? Yes. I mean, it happens quite often, right? But just be aware that there's no provision for that within FMLA. It's pretty interesting. Okay. Let's see. Serious health condition make an employee unable to perform one or more of the essential functions of the employee's job. And then we get to the military reasons because of an exigency arising out of the fact that the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parent is a covered military service member on active duty or notified of impending call or ordered active duty in support of a contingency operation. Okay. So with the military leave, keep in mind, FMLA is not for the military person, it's for the employee who needs to be away because they have someone who's affected. What is the law that allows leave for the military person from an active workplace?
Military Leave Act.
Right, but it's USERA.
Yes, sir.
USERA allows for the continuation of the medical coverage. USERA. We often get the terms USERA and ERISA and then FMLA, mixed up. So that's a totally different situation, all right? 12-month period. Employee is entitled to 12 work weeks of leave during any 12-month period. And then the bullet points there, it tells you how you can count that. Calendar year, fixed months 12 years, such as physical year or something required by state law, etc., or their start date. 12-month period measured forward or 12-month period measured backward. Now, I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you this. You can read through all of these. Does anybody want to help me and tell me what is the best way to do it? I don't have any more coffee. Okay. If you're doing calendar year, let's say that someone says, I won't leave, and it's early October, okay? There's October. And here's going to be January. Here's going to be December. How many leaves do they get under FMLA? How many weeks? I'm sorry, how many weeks?
12.
12, okay? So if I'm doing calendar year, that says I can take October, November, December. Is that about 12 weeks? All right, there's my 12 weeks. Oh, look, it's January. Oh, I need to be out because of... So how many weeks do they get now?
12.
So how many weeks could they be out? So you basically have just lost, 6 weeks of last year, 12 and 12, 24 weeks continuous, all right? That's your calendar year. Fiscal year, let's look at fiscal year. So let's say your fiscal year is a July year, okay? So it restarts and resets each July. So what that says is, someone comes to you in early April, May, June, and you give them their 12 weeks. It resets July. What do they get again? What are they going to get? Is that a good way? Not unless you want to, have someone that you have job protected leave for 24 weeks straight. What about anniversary year? It's going to be the same thing. Anniversary year, same situation. So the regs even tell you that the rolling backward is the best way to do it. So check your policy. You want rolling backward. So rolling backward says that someone comes to you, let's just say it's December 1. They come to you and they say, I need leave. And you say, okay, let me look back and see how much leave you've taken from between December 1 of this year and December 1 of last year. And if they had already taken 8 weeks, how many weeks did they get? 4. Okay, so they would get basically all of December. But once they burn through those 4 weeks, then it's December 31st. You look back to when? December 31st. They don't get leave. They burn through their 12 weeks. Does that make sense? Okay. So rolling backward is the most protective for the employer, and the regulations even tell the employer that. So, okay. So that's your rolling backward. Now, if you go, I think it's just one page over to, does your second paragraph or second segment say failure to choose? Okay, failure to choose. If an employer fails to select one of the methods described for the 12-month period, measuring the 12-month period, the option that provides the most beneficial outcome for the employee will be used. Okay? So if you don't say which method you're using to measure it, the law says you have to give them the most generous. There was actually a case about this where American Standard in Ohio had this situation, and it actually worked against them. They changed their policy on how they're going to implement and handle FMLA. They did not give a 60-day notice. You have to give your employees 60-day notice if you're going to change your policy. You can't just change it on the fly. So please be aware of that. And that's in that same paragraph. The employer may subsequently change an option only by providing the 60-day notice of the option the employer intends to implement. So please be aware of that. Your next section there deals with the covered service member leave. Now here's where it gets confusing. Under FMLA service member leave provisions, an eligible employee is entitled to a total of how many work weeks? 26. Okay, during a single 12-month period to care for a covered service member with a serious injury or illness. An employer must determine the single 12-month period in which the 26 weeks of leave entitlement occurs using the 12-month period measured how? Forward. So now you've got 2 different calendars. You're going to have one for your traditional FMLA and a second one for your military FMLA. Have fun. Okay, so please be aware of that, and we'll look at specifics later. What about if a holiday falls during the time the person is on FMLA? That next paragraph there, next section. For purposes of determining the amount of leave used by the employee, the fact that the holiday may occur within a week taken as FMLA has no effect. The week is counted as a week of FMLA leave. However, if an employee is using FMLA leave in increments of less than a week, the holiday will not count against the leave entitlement unless the employee was otherwise scheduled and expected to work during the holiday. So be aware of how you count your holidays. All right, your next page goes to intermittent or reduced leave. This is where someone may not need the full 12 weeks or even a full day, and they just want to take an increment, a short period of time. Go to about halfway down, periodic treatment. Intermittent leave may be taken for serious health condition of a parent or child, their own condition, or the condition of a service member, which requires their treatment. let's see, one thing I wanted to point out here, let's keep reading that paragraph. Intermittent leave would include leave taken on an occasional basis for medical appointments, leave taken several days at a time over 6 months, like chemotherapy. A pregnant employee may take leave intermittently for prenatal exams or for her own conditions, such as severe morning sickness. An example of an employee taking leave on a reduced leave schedule is an employee who is recovering from a serious health condition and is not strong enough to work for in a full-time capacity. Incapacity, it goes on to define that they're unable to perform the essential functions of the position. Where would you know what the essential functions of the position are?
Job description.
Job description. That's why it's really important to keep your job descriptions up to date. Okay. Now this is something that you may want to take note of as well. At the bottom of that page, birth or placement of a child. When leave is taken for the birth of a healthy child or placement of a healthy child for adoption or foster care, an employee may take leave intermittently on a reduced leave schedule only if the employee agrees. So that is something that you can state in your policy. Okay. Now, exigency of, again, the military leave, it gives you here the incidences of when that could occur. Usually it's something that's it's immediate. They have to do it right away. They have that exigency come up. It's something quick and immediate. And it tells you here what those would be. It's short notice deployment, military activities, child care. They've got to take care of that child today, that kind of thing, because of the military mandates, of the obligations of the family. All right, scheduling intermittent or reduced leave.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, if you have a child and family and my husband wants to take time off, if the employer doesn't agree, then you have to take the 12 weeks off all at once?
Oh, because of the intermittent? And then that's getting back to the bonding, birth or the placement of a child.
It says if the employer agrees, so if they don't, then if they want to take the time off, it has to be 12 weeks.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It has to be the full block. Let's put a note there. We're going to come back to that because I believe we get more clarification later. Okay, just hold that thought, and we will certainly come back to that. Okay. Something with the intermittent leave, look at the bottom there, alternative position. An employer may require an employee to temporarily transfer to an available alternative position for which the employee is qualified and better accommodates recurring periods of leave than does the regular position. So in other words, if you have someone who has a need for leave, you can transfer that person because of the workload of that position. That's certainly an option for you as the employer. So keep that, you're not locked in, if you will, without one position. So keep that in mind, okay? Let's see. The next page does give us a better definition. The second paragraph, the alternative position must have equivalent pay and benefits. So you can transfer them, but you can't lessen their pay or their benefits. Be aware of that. Different duties, but again, equivalent pay and benefits. That same paragraph, the second sentence or second line, the employer may increase the pay and benefits of an existing alternative position so as to make them equivalent to the pay and benefits of the employee's regular job. The employer may also transfer the employee to a part-time job with the same hourly rate of pay and benefits, provided the employee is not required to take more leave than medically necessary. So again, it's to protect the employee, right? And the next paragraph gives you a little bit of a warning. An employer may not transfer the employee to an alternative position in order to discourage the employee from taking the leave or otherwise inflict a hardship on the employee. All right, this is important. Go to the bottom, increments of intermittent or reduced schedule leave. When an employee takes FMLA leave on intermittent or reduced schedule leave, the employer must account for the leave using an increment no greater than the shortest period of time that the employer uses to account for other forms of leave. Okay? So you can't make them take huge blocks. You've got to look at how you account for other forms of leave for the employees. Let's see. Go down about 5 or 6 lines where it says If an employer uses different increments to account for different types, the employer must account for FMLA leave in the smallest increment used to account for any other type of leave. For example, if an employer accounts for the use of leave in increments of 1 hour and the use of sick leave in increments of 1/2 hour, the FMLA leave must be accounted for increments in how long? 1/2 hour. Now that could get 12 weeks of 1/2 hours. Yeah, it's a lot. So you might want to look at that. All right, the next page. This is something we often forget. Calculation of leave is about a third of the way down. When an employee takes leave on intermittent or reduced leave basis, only the amount of leave actually taken may be counted toward the employee's leave entitlement. The actual work week is the basis of the leave entitlement. So what that means is, if you've got someone who's working for you, and let's say, what's your full-time basis for most of you in the room? How many hours per week? 40, 30, 40, 35? Okay. Let's say you have someone who works for you and they work an average of 50 hours a week. They're with you 2.5 years. They need to take their FMLA. And you're saying, well, our full-time status is 40 hours, so we're going to count your FMLA 40 hours per week. Not so. What this is saying is they get 50 hours per week. Because it's based on what their normal week was before the leave. Okay, so please take note of that. You might want to highlight that as well. Okay. Next page, interaction with the FLSA. This is the FMLA exception to the FLSA exemption. Okay. And all that said, that first paragraph there, basically it tells you that if you've got someone who's in exempt status and they take FMLA leave, you can prorate their leave intermittently. You can treat them as if they were hourly, because how else are you going to accumulate intermittent leave if you don't? That's not a threat to them, that's their protection. That could be your 50-hour-a-week employee, you know. But, so you can count for hours even though they're a salary, I should say exempt employee, okay? Does that make sense? So just be aware of that one, that is an exception. Next page, paid versus unpaid leave. Is FMLA leave paid or unpaid? Unpaid. Could you pay them while they're on leave? Absolutely. You can do that if you would like. It would be expensive, but you can do that. That's certainly allowable.
How about those holiday pay?
Well, that's when it falls back into how you count them. And then if they're out and it's FMLA and they're not being paid, they're not being paid. They're on FMLA. It's unpaid. Okay. All right. So go ahead and look at the second paragraph. Means substitute means that the paid leave provided by the employer and accrued pursuant to the policies will run concurrent with the unpaid leave. Okay. Now, if that is, to your point, that may reflect back to your holiday pay, because it does say the employee receives pay pursuant to the applicable paid leave policy. If your FMLA is unpaid and your policy is unpaid, then it would stand that they would not get paid for that. Does that make sense? It's whatever your paid leave policy is. Okay. Okay. Let's see. It's your policies. Go down about 3 more paragraphs. Leave taken pursuant to the disability leave plan may be considered FMLA leave for a serious health condition and counted the leave entitlement permitted under the FMLA if the disability meets the requirements for a serious health condition. So in other words, what they're saying is, could you have someone out on short-term disability and it be considered FMLA?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If it meets the definition of FMLA as a serious health condition, then it's FMLA. Is it also a short-term disability? Absolutely. Okay, so it runs concurrent.
I was just going to say back to the holiday pay.
Yeah.
On a couple of pages before, it did state that if the person takes the FMLA in increments, they will be paid.
Yes, yes. So, okay. Thank you. All right, so here's the point is we need to be concerned about making sure that people are insured. I know we talked a little bit about FMLA and COBRA and those 2 employees that were in the car wreck and how they were going to be covered. look at the bottom there under interaction with workers' comp. The FMLA provides that a serious health condition may result from injury to the employee on or off the job. If the employer designates the leave as FMLA leave, the leave counts against the employee's leave entitlement. Because the workers' comp is not unpaid, the provision to substitute the accrued paid leave is not applicable. So, in other words, and you could even do that, you could pay them. Again, that's your election as the employer, whether or not you wanted that to be paid. But when you're talking about someone being insured, we need to think about how that works. If you've got someone who, let's say, we should run that concurrently. We just talked about short-term disability and workers' comp and FMLA. We know that those can run together, right? They're defined differently, but they could all be running at one time. Of course, we know there may be some offset with what, your workers' comp, your disability might pay, but that's beside the point. In other words, they could run concurrently. If you've got someone who says, I've got 8 weeks of PTO. I know that sounds like a lot, but let's just say for purposes of illustration. And you say, well, you know what? We're going to let you go through your PTO before we start your FMLA. Okay, then you start the FMLA, and your FMLA can go for how long? 12 weeks. So how many total weeks have they been out? 20 weeks. 20 weeks. So my question to you is, if they go out at this point, and they're out 8 weeks on PTO, depending on your policy, as to whether or not the insurance stays intact when they're on vacation or PTO, it could very well be that the FMLA is the only way to keep them insured after that point. It gets back to the wording of your medical certificates, because at this point, they're not actively at work, which is written into your certificate. Are they on FMLA yet? No, they're not FMLA. Are they on COBRA? No, because we forgot, we didn't put them on COBRA if that was the way to do it at the point that the incident occurred. So if they're not any of these, and they're out there on PTO, they may or may not be insured under your contract. That's when you need to look at the wording of your certificate. Okay? So I just say that to say be sure what is in your policy to make sure that they are insured, because you don't want them to come back, with problems with the insurance company.
I have a question about PTO and FMLA. So I have 8 weeks of PTO. If I use PTO, I don't have to be on FMLA yet?
I would encourage you to put them on when it gets done.
Okay, that's what we did.
That's my point in bringing this up.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Thank you for clarifying. That's my point in bringing this up, is that you don't have this gap
Yes,
of risk that you as the employer are taking that something could happen.
and that's determined by the wording of your policy.
Correct. Correct.
I know a lot of companies are putting in their policies that if you want FMLA, you must use up some of your PTO as part of the leave, and then the remaining part will be unpaid.
Okay. And that's, again, depending on if you're using up and you're creating this gap again, that's a policy, but that has nothing to do with the certificate wording, right? As to whether or not you're actually covered in that gap period. So that's where we have to be aware of what our contracts say. Just make a note here about something. Okay. Let's see. The next page talks a little bit more about someone on workers' comp. The first paragraph there basically says that you cannot make them come back for light duty under workers' comp if, in fact, they are still on FMLA and it's FMLA qualifying. So you cannot make them come back. So you can't force that issue. Leave policies, this really just gives us more reason to understand that second paragraph in particular, that disability can run concurrent with our FMLA. My point in bringing all this up is I think oftentimes we think of FMLA as just for maternity. We don't understand there can be a lot of times when FMLA does need to be captured. Why would you want to capture the FMLA?
Less than away from work.
less time away from work, what else?
That's just that limited time for 12 weeks time.
It's the 12 weeks, okay? So, you know, if Judy works for me and Eric works for me, all right? And Eric is out, and he's out on work comp for 2 months, and then he comes back and all is well. But that's all I did, is I just gave him work comp. I didn't designate FMLA. Judy, did you know you were pregnant? Okay, Judy's pregnant.
Congratulations.
6 months later, Judy's pregnant. I'm going, oh, FMLA, if I designate FMLA. I put Judy on FMLA. She finds out that when he comes back and he wants some bonding time for him because his wife is pregnant and he's still within that 12-month period, now I'm going to give him as much time as he wants for his FMLA. Wait a minute, he was off 8 weeks already for his work comp. Do you think Judy's going to be unhappy? Wait a minute, he's already been away. You let him be away. Now he's going to be away again? That's not fair. What is that? But that's not fair. That's words from the EEOC. That's not fair. Okay? So that consistency thing has to come in. Very important. Okay, at the bottom of that page under review, number 1, employers must select one of 4 standard methods, okay, for the 12 weeks of leave. And then number 2, employers may not count periods when their business is closed and employees are expected to report against the 12 weeks. Okay? So go 2 more pages, when to grant, and you've got those definitions up there again. When to grant leave, and this is, I think we'll get back to the question about the bonding. Go to about halfway down, leave for the pregnancy or birth of a child. Bonding leave, the FMLA provides that both the mother and father are entitled to FMLA leave to be with the healthy newborn child, often referred to as bonding time, during the 12-month period beginning on the date of birth. The employee's entitlement to leave for the birth expires at the end of the 12-month period, so be aware of that. And it talks about state leave. If state leave allows for the employer, permits bonding leave to be taken beyond this period, such leave will not qualify as FMLA. It is important that both the mother and the father are entitled to the FMLA leave. It talks about leave for the mother and then leave for the husband. A husband is entitled to FMLA leave if needed to care for his pregnant spouse who is capacitated, or if needed to care for the spouse during her prenatal care, or if needed to care for the spouse following the birth of the child, if the spouse has a serious health condition. So when the FMLA was updated, it did clarify that the husband does get the bonding leave as well. That was an update. Serious health condition of a child, it provides that the mother and the father are entitled to leave if needed to care for the child with a serious health condition. Thus, the husband and wife may each take 12 weeks if needed to care for the newborn child, even if they're with the same employer, provided they have not exhausted their leave already. Okay. Then here we go to use of intermittent or reduced leave. An eligible employee may use intermittent or reduced leave after the birth to be with a healthy newborn child only if the employer agrees. So I think, Erin, that gets back to your question. Okay. Use of intermittent or reduced leave. If it's in your policy as the employer, you can't allow that. Okay? All right, and then at the bottom of the page, leave for adoption or foster care. The point here is that you need to, when you're interviewing employees and you're not asking that maybe they volunteer that they're thinking of adopting a child. Ding, ding, FMLA. This is leave. Okay, think about that. Be aware of that. Something we might easily miss. The next page, again, just defines a little bit more about the health conditions. The next page, leave for serious health condition for the employee or the employee's family member. Familial relationship there goes into very specifics about what is a spouse, what is a parent. If you will hold your finger there and go to, in your book, the very last tab. In my book, it should be page 10, but in your book, do you have page numbers in the last one? Oh, okay. Go to, there should be 12 pages in there. If you go to about page 11, so just one from the very back, it will say Administrator's Interpretation. This is defining the fact of what is a parent, And basically, the DOL came out with an opinion letter that said, you know what? Even if you're not the biological parent, even if you're not a legal guardian, there are instances where you are the parent of the child. And local parentis to me says you're kind of crazy, but basically it means you are acting in a parent role. And if you go to the very next page, the last page in that section, look under conclusion. Based upon the thorough examination of the relevant factors, is the administrator's interpretation that either day-to-day care or financial support may establish in local parental relationship. Okay, so if you get into a situation, an employee comes to you and they're questioning whether or not, or maybe you're questioning whether they can take that leave, you might want to refer back to them. Okay. The next page gives you further clarification. I think this was on our invitation too. Further clarification of son or daughter. I think we often think of, a newborn, giving birth, that family medical leave. What is said here is a child age 18 is a son or daughter under that age without regard for whether they have a disability. But it goes on to say, an eligible employee requesting leave to care for a son or daughter under 18 must only show a need to care. But look down at that next paragraph, and it's saying, the last sentence of that next paragraph, a parent will be entitled to FMLA leave to care for a son or daughter 18 years of age or older if the adult son or daughter meets the following. They have a disability under the ADA, they cannot care for themselves, they have a serious health condition, or they need to care for a serious health condition. So, could you have an employee with a 32-year-old mentally disabled son who needs FMLA? Yes, and they're eligible. Yes, all four. Yes. Okay. Then the definition of disability goes, gives you a little bit more there at the bottom of the page. The ADA is now the ADAAA, which was the amendment. And have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether it was FMLA or ADA? Those two are really very related when you think about it. The ADA is basically a right to work. Your FMLA is a right to leave. I mean, you can think of it that way. Leave could be, under some extreme examples, or situations rather, leave could be an accommodation under the ADA. Okay. The other thing to remember is when you get to the end of the 12-week period and someone has exhausted their FMLA leave, are you at the point of terminating that employee? Not without thinking of ADA. Okay. Just because they've gone through their 12 weeks of job protected leave does not mean that you can now, without any legal problems, terminate that employee. There is an obligation on your part as the employer to have that interactive process with that employee to see if there's something that can be done to restore them back to work. There may not be, but you need to make that effort. It's very important. And just remember that just because you gave them FMLA has nothing to do with their ADA rights. It's two separate laws that we have to work together on. Okay. And so I'm at the top of the second page that starts. The ADAAA also provides. The ADAAA also provides its definition of substantially limited does not require the impairment prevent or severely significantly restrict a major life activity. Okay. To give you some examples here, go on to the next page. If I were you, this is where we start with a serious health condition. If you have about halfway down it says serious health condition, hold your hand there and just flip one page over, and it starts incapacity and treatment. This is a really good page. If you've got a highlighter or a post-it or something, if you ever need to come back to what is FMLA serious health condition, this is your page that lists it all. It's very good. Incapacity of treatment, more than 3 consecutive full calendar days. And then it does say treatment 2 or more times within 30 days for the first incapacity. Treatment by a healthcare provider at least one occasion that results in a regimen. Pregnancy or prenatal care, chronic conditions, and that tells you at least twice a year for periodic visits. It continues over an extended period of time, and it may be episodic. permanent or long-term conditions like Alzheimer's, and then conditions that require multiple treatments. Okay, so when they did the updates in 2009 to FMLA, they started relaxing the timeframes a little bit and gave us much more to grasp as to what's periodic. You know, what does that mean? So it's got a lot more meat in it now for you as the employer, which was an improvement. The next page talks about healthcare provider. It's really pretty broad as to who can sign that certification. Any healthcare provider that's recognized by the employer or accepted by the group health plan, podiatrists, dentists, psychologists, optometrists, chiropractors, nurse practitioners, Christian Science practitioners, or healthcare provider, okay? And then unable to perform the functions of the physician, go to the third line there, an employee is unable to perform the functions of the physician in cases where the healthcare provider finds the employee is unable to work at all or is unable to perform any of the essential functions of the physician within the meaning of the ADA. An employee who is absent from work to receive medical treatment for a serious health condition is considered to be unable to perform the essential functions of the physician. So, as the employer, if the doctor is saying they can't do the job, then you have to take that, and they are certifying. So you really shouldn't argue that. There is a instance of second and third opinions, and we'll look at that in just a minute, okay? It gives you a really good definition of what are essential and how do you define that. So maybe, does everybody in here have current and up-to-date job descriptions? Okay, be honest with me. Most of us don't. Working always, continually, because jobs are changing, right? If you're not sure what's essential, what's non-essential, and sometimes that's pretty hard to define, this gives you 4 bullets, okay? The position exists to perform that function. Removing that function would fundamentally alter the nature of the position. There are a limited number of employees available who can perform that function, or it's highly specialized. Those are essential functions. So a good reference point for you, okay? And then it gives you some DOL info. The next page, statement of functions. Talks a little bit about the essential functions, the ability to perform them. Here's an interesting section, employer inquiries. What can the employer ask the employee? When an employee calls in sick, an employer should ask the following questions. Has the employee seen a healthcare provider? How many times has the employee seen the provider for this condition? Is the condition temporary or recurring? Is the employee under continuing treatment? Is the employee capable of working, performing other regular daily activities? If unable to work or perform, how long has the employee been able to do so? All right, but look at that note below there. An employer has no right to receive the healthcare provider diagnosis. Okay, so there is a point. You're going to get that certification. It's going to tell you a lot, but you don't need to know anything beyond that. Okay.
So sometimes the employee, they just voluntarily give.
Yes. A lot of employees just tell you more than you probably don't know. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. It does talk about what does the FMLA not apply to, that next paragraph there. It does not apply to routine physical exams, eye exams, dental exams, continuing treatment for over-the-counter meds, bed rest, drinking fluids, exercise, etc. So that's probably good for you to remember, because you could have employees that say, I need my FMLA and it was a cold or something. So, okay. Substance abuse may constitute a serious health condition if the requirements are met. However, FMLA leave may only be taken for treatment of substance abuse by a healthcare provider or by a provider of healthcare services on referral. Conversely, absence because of the employee's use rather than treatment is not FMLA. Yeah, we've all been there, right? We've all been there. Okay. Next page starts going into exigency leave. Just remember, exigency is 12 work weeks, and we'll get more specific there. If you go over, I think it's maybe 2 or 3 pages to reinstatement, employer obligations. We're going to try to get through this first tab before we have a break, so bear with me here. Employer obligations. An employer must restore an employee returning from FMLA leave to the same position the employee held when leave commenced, or to an equivalent position with equivalent benefits, pay, and other terms and conditions. This is a very active section. We got a lot of questions about this. Let's say that Ann works for Greg, and Ann is the human resource person. And she needs to go out on FMLA. So Ann goes out on her FMLA. While she's out, work has to be done, right? It just can't sit there. So Greg is going to hire Katie. Katie comes into the HR position, and she's fabulous. I mean, she's a machine. She gets it done. People love her. She's the belle of the ball. Everyone just loves her. Ann's FMLA leaves over. She walks in the door, and she says, Greg, I'm back. I want my job. What does Greg have to say? Here it is. And he says goodbye to Katie. By the way, he'll give you a really good reference. But anyway, the point is, it doesn't matter. It's job-protected leave, okay? What is equivalent pay? We talked a little bit about that. Includes unconditional pay increases, cost of living, conditional pay increases, such as seniority and length of service, pay premiums enjoyed by the employee prior to leave, such as a shift differential, and bonuses for reasons that would not require performance by the employee, such as attendance and safety. So below there, that next, skip that next paragraph going down. Equivalent pay includes any bonus or payment, whether it's discretionary or non-discretionary, made to employees consistent with those described. However, if a bonus or other payment is based on achievement of specific goals, such as hours worked, perfect attendance, etc., then the payment may be denied unless otherwise paid to employees on equivalent leave status. Okay? So, there's some misunderstanding that when these changes took place this last time that FMLA was changed, that they took away the requirement for the employer to not count the absence against the perfect attendance. Be very careful with this. For example, would you take away a performance attendance bonus if an employee had taken vacation time? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so what it's saying is, how would you treat that employee for other leaves if they were gone and there was some kind of incentive or bonus out there? You got to be that consistency factor, okay? If they were otherwise qualified, then they probably should get it. Excuse me. Okay, so the next page does give you more definition about equivalent benefits. If you've got someone who had it may sound silly, but hey, we all have things that are important to us. If an employee comes back and they had a certain office, like it was the corner office, had a great view of the lake, and while they were gone, you redid the office, and now they don't get the view of the lake. Is that equivalent benefits if they're no longer in the office they had? May sound silly, but hey, those things are important. That's equivalent benefit. Equivalent terms and conditions at the bottom of the page gives you more definition. Let's see, the next page, at the very top where it says must be reinstated the same or geographically approximate work site, is ordinarily entitled to return to the same shift, etc. So there, that gives you some definitions. Limitation on the employee's right to reinstatement. The first bullet point, if the employee is laid off during the course of the leave, the employer's responsibility to continue the leave, etc., unless there's a union agreement, basically, it ceases at that point. If you've had a major work reduction and you can, very comfortably say, if this person had been actively here, we still would not have maintained that person on our payroll. We had to reduce. Then that's understandable. Goes on to talk about shift, elimination, or overtime, if they're hired for a specific term, etc. Next page. Has anybody heard of key employee? Anybody know what a key employee is? Someone that's paid, Greg?
Somebody's paid in the top 8 or 10%.
10%. That's a key employee, if they're in the top 10%. What is, the message here is if you've got somebody who's in that pay grade and they go on FMLA, you have to tell them if you cannot restore them back. You can't take them back. A good example would be a company who's just doing fabulously well, and a high-paid executive says, "Oh, we're growing our family. I need to be off for, my wife, and so I'm going to take a leave." And during that leave, it's horrible. Things just plummet, their biggest customer cancels, they're having to let people go, it's just horrible. And this person wants to come back to his job. You say, I can't afford you anymore. We just can't afford you anymore. So these are provisions that guide you through that process. It does define what the 10% is. It does talk at the bottom of that page about substantial or grievous economic injury. The next page, it does say an employer who believes that reinstatement may be denied must give written notice to the employee at the time the employee gives notice of the need. So that's the point, is that they tell you, and it's a top 10% person. A good rule of thumb is just go ahead and tell them, hey, you're a key employee. I just need to tell you, I might not be able to restore you to your job. Okay? Maybe a delicate conversation, but you're supposed to tell them when they take the leave, not when they try to come back.
So this is all compared to the pay, it doesn't matter the job description and what kind of.
It defines the job pay. It does talk about, a couple of pages back, how you define the top 10%. Yes, it talks to one of the highest 10% year-to-date earnings, and it tells you what's included in that 10%. Okay? All right, go to the page that starts interaction with other policies and laws. It's about 1 or 2 pages over. Okay. Second paragraph, employers must observe, this is under employer policy, excuse me. Employers must observe any employee benefit program or plan that provides greater family or medical leave rights to employees than the rights established within the FMLA. In other words, what they're saying is you cannot follow the FMLA only if there is a state law or some other law that would give them more generous benefits. Okay? And by the way, there are a lot of states that give more generous leave than the FMLA. So, California, yeah. So there are several states that do, so please be aware of those. And that's at the bottom there where it talks to state law. Go to about the 4th line down, third line down. State and local law may differ from federal law. When both federal and state laws apply, an employee is entitled to the most generous benefit provided. So they're going to get the greater of the two. Okay? Go on to the next page, and it gives you some other illustrations. Federal and state anti-discrimination laws. Nothing in the FMLA modifies or affects any federal or state law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, religion, color, national origin, sex, and disability. And it talks to particularly the PDA, Pregnancy Discrimination Act. You will often be in a quandary with FMLA and the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. You would think that they would be, just by definition, in lockstep. But sometimes what happens is, if someone, let's say you have an eligible employee or a new employee who's not eligible for FMLA, they've been with you 4 months, and they need to take their leave for the birth of their child. Technically, are they eligible for FMLA? They've been with you 4 months? No. But what if you just had an employee take their 12 weeks that did have the eligibility on FMLA, and pregnancy discrimination says you have to treat this person equally to anyone else that works there. So that says they should get how many weeks? 12. And what's normal leave for maternity is more like 6 or 8. See how that could be a problem? Okay. So just be aware that you're going to have some challenges, okay? So let's keep going. The next page. One thing that we talked about briefly was, ADA and FMLA. When someone gets to the end of their 12 weeks of FMLA, and now you should think about what law? What did we say? ADA. So when you get to the end of that 12 weeks, what are some things that you might want to think about as to your considerations? One would be, okay, I'm at the end of my FMLA, so I need to think about ADA. I also may want to think about state law. That maybe gives them more than their 12 weeks. I also want to look at my leave policies and what's in my what? What's in my handbook? What have I told them I'm going to give them? Because it's not just your policies, it's your practices, and are you following those policies? So there's a lot of things that come into play that you need to just kind of stop and think through. Usually indefinite leave is handled on a case-by-case basis. I believe the next page will be USERA, Uniform Services Employment Reemployment Rights Act. That's just your reference there. And it does talk to veterans are entitled to receive all rights and benefits of employment that they would obtain if they had been continuously employed. Again, we're not going to count that against them. ADA and FMLA, that next paragraph there gives you, or section rather, gives you a lot of good information about how, okay? The top says uniform services, okay? The next section talks about ADA. Does anybody else need help finding information? Yeah, I'm sorry, just the next section. Thank you. So that's a really good section that, you know, again, if you have time to read through that, maybe in your car before you head back to the office, that's a really good section to read through. The next page talks to reinstatement. Let's see. Okay. Go over, I think let's see, go 3 pages. About halfway down, it'll say consolidated omnibus. What is that? COBRA, okay? An employer must offer Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act coverage once a qualifying event occurs. Taking FMLA does not constitute a COBRA qualifying event. Thus, if the employee is absent for work and the employers provide the employee with a proper FMLA notice and properly designated leaves to FMLA, COBRA is not triggered. Easy for me to say. When is COBRA triggered?
Reduction of hours?
Reduction of hours.
It was terminated or?
It was terminated. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Termination.
Termination. What about at the end of the 12 weeks? They still need to be out. What happens? It's COBRA time. Don't forget to do that. Don't forget to do that. That is a COBRA event. Okay? Because otherwise, does COBRA have some pretty specific timelines? Yeah, it does. You don't want people to be, you know, floating out there. They're not active, they're not inactive, they're, you know, and worse, how is their medical insurance intact? The point here also is that when someone goes on FMLA, the insurance that they have a right to continue is the same as what? COBRA. So they can continue medical and what else? Dental, what else? Vision, and have rights to their FSA, all under COBRA. Okay, so it's the same thing with FMLA. And that's why this is in here. It's telling you that. Okay, the next page is a good review page. Number 9 there. Although employers may terminate workers' comp and STD benefits to employees who refuse to accept light duty assignments, the employee still may be entitled to full FMLA leave. Okay. Number 13, employers may request more medical documentation from employees requesting special consideration under the AD than they can from employees requesting leave for FMLA qualifying reason. Interesting. Number 14, although individual supervisors are not liable under the ADA, they may be liable under the FMLA. The next page talks to records. Be sure you're maintaining good records. Let's see. Next page talks to joint employers. That's just sort of a review. And then the very last page in that section, number 6 under review. Medical records must be kept separately from other FMLA records and made available only on a need-to-know basis. This is medical information that needs to be kept separate, so I did need to mention that. Okay, let's take a 15-minute break and we'll pick it up from